From the News 19 Weather Center, I'm Chief Meteorologist Efren Afante. Thanks for joining us here on this Wednesday evening. The time is 8 o'clock and the National Hurricane Center just came up with their at least informational update on Hurricane Idalia. Still a Category 2 hurricane. Winds have dropped down, sustained winds have dropped just a little bit from 110 to now 105. Still gusting over 120 miles an hour. Still moving north at 16, but the other noticeable thing is that the pressure, the center pressure of the tropical cyclone has now dropped down to 965. It's still strengthening even though its outer winds in the core have dropped down to 105. And if you look at the loop, when it pauses, it's developing an eye, and more importantly, on the northeast quadrant of the eye, there are some overshooting tops of storms. It is cycling and strengthening at the core. Now, we still have an indication that it'll strengthen still as a Category 3 by tomorrow morning. Winds sustained at about 115 miles an hour. It is yet to be determined the strength that it makes landfall, but there's growing concern that it may make landfall as a Category 3 or a very strong Category 2. But the bottom line, it's going to make landfall of at least 100 mile an hour sustained winds sometime tomorrow morning, right in the Big Bend of Florida, somewhere around Cedar Key to just east of Port St. Joe's, and then make its way through, slightly lessening to a Category 1 hurricane with 85 mile an hour winds as it just makes its through to the south end of Georgia. And then as it makes its way into South Carolina through the low country, we're looking at the projections as a tropical storm with wind sustained at about 60 miles an hour. The cone of uncertainty still covers a good portion of the coastline of the Palmetto State and inwards into the Midlands. And in more particular, the cone, even though the cone is not really the thing that we should be looking at, the projections from the National Hurricane Center still do show that there is going to be enforced tropical storm winds, even the possibility of hurricane or gale force winds from the low country to the Grand Strand and into portions of our Midland communities. Now, we know that this is going to be an intense tropical storm once Idalia gets to us, and we know that the spaghetti models have been continuing to shift even more to the north and west. A lot of the guidance models are still on the same trajectory, but a lot of the computer models are now continuing to shift it to the northwest. One thing is for certain, the Weather Prediction Center has already indicated that all of the Midlands, if you watch us early today at 3 o'clock, it was only around the areas of I-95. Now it covers all of our Midland communities, and just about every county, every town in the Midlands are under a moderate risk, a very high level risk of potential flooding rainfall from this event. Now, this is one projection. It is going to change, but the projection right now shows that along and north of I-20, conservatively, many of these communities can see as little as an inch of rainfall to upwards of about 2 to 2.5. Just south of I-20, expand that to about 2.5 to possibly 4 inches of rainfall. And then if you draw a line from, say, Bishopville to Hopkins, or let's say Sandy Run, and then all the way down to possibly Springfield in far northwest Orangeburg County, everybody from that point to the southeast, 6, 7, 8 inches of rainfall. Localized areas, especially low-lying areas, can accumulate a total rainfall. Now, I'm not talking about how much is going to end up on the ground, how much is falling from the sky. Localized areas could see 9 inches or more by the time this gets done. That's why the National Weather Service has got all of the Midland communities under a flood watch, not a flash flood watch, a flood watch until Thursday afternoon at about 2 o'clock. The other thing is that we have a tropical storm watch. If you didn't see us earlier today, the tropical storm watch has now been expanded. That includes Sumter and all of Orangeburg County. Still continues to cover Calhoun and Clarendon County as well. This tropical storm watch is in effect until Friday afternoon. This we're expecting about the winds. Now keep in mind that, again, this is going to change depending on the trajectory of Idalia as it makes its way to and after landfall in Florida's Big Bend. As we get into Wednesday midday, the winds are going to start picking up. It's going to be coming out of the southwest to the northeast. And as we get into Friday midday into the afternoon, the winds will pick up 35 to 45 mile an hour wind gusts. But as we get into Friday early evening and into the mid-evening, winds are going to be picking up possibly 50 to 55 wind gusts straight out of the north as it moves through. That means we're going to be looking at sustained winds, continuous ongoing winds in many areas of the Midlands, outside of the Northwest Midlands, where they're going to be experiencing sustained winds possibly 25 to 30. But when you get to areas of Kershaw, Lee, Lexington, Richland, Saluda, Aiken, and everybody to the southeast, we're looking at sustained winds, very likely 40 to 45 miles an hour. And as we go into Thursday early morning, Idalia is probably already in the Grand Strand or in North Carolina, but we're now going to have winds shifting out of the northwest and still pretty strong winds. 40 to 45 mile an hour wind gusts with sustained winds over 30. These winds will finally start tapering down by Thursday daybreak, but you're still looking at winds gusting over 25 to 30 miles an hour in the far eastern portions of our Midland communities. The other thing is that there is a very slight, and it's a slight possibility right now, for severe weather when it gets into portions around I-95, so southeast Sumter, Clarendon, southern Calhoun, and at least most of Orangeburg County. And then just north of that, the dividing line south of I-20, the possibility of strong storms. Typically, when we talk about strong storms, we're talking about what we deal with as the front approaches, where we have possibly severe weather, in which we have a thunderstorm warning with 60 to 70 mile an hour winds and possibly tornadic warnings. But this is part of a tropical cyclone, so the likelihood of storms that are going to be severe with 60 mile an hour wind gusts is going to be lesser than the chance of the possibility, not so much of hail, but of tornadic warnings. In hurricane circulations, you have outer bands before the whole thing comes to you. But for the rain and the winds, those outer bands that are outside of 300 miles from the center of circulation is where we get storms that could possibly be tornadic. Example, if you were here back in 2017, we had Tropical Storm Fred that came through Florida, Alabama, Georgia, ended up in the upstate, and from 3 to 8 o'clock that evening during Tropical Storm Fred, we had multiple tornado warnings. Those storms were about 350 miles away from the center of Fred as Fred was making its way through Alabama and Georgia. So there's a small potential, very small, but a small potential nevertheless. Again, just to recap what we're dealing with, overall picture for the entire state of South Carolina. Tropical storm watches in effect for Sumter, Clarendon, Calhoun, and Orangeburg County. Tropical storm warnings in effect for the entire coastline of South Carolina and all points coastal inland. Notice nobody else in the Palmetto State has got any of these watches or warnings, but we're still going to be dealing with windy conditions. And to add to that, a hurricane watch is in effect for portions of the low country along the coastline in areas from Beaufort to Hilton Head Island and points just south of Hendersonville. This is going to be one of those situations where the winds could strengthen. In addition to that, not only in the Midlands, but a very large swath, more than 3/4 of the state are under a moderate risk for flooding rainfall for Wednesday's event from Idalia. And that's why a flood watch is in effect not only for the Midlands, but just about all of South Carolina except for the far northern portions of the upstate up by the mountains. The bottom line is this: with the severe weather we're looking at, and with Idalia still moving to the north and not making landfall yet, it is already making an impact to Florida and will be making an impact to us starting sometime tomorrow morning and into late tomorrow night. We'll have an update from the National Hurricane Center at 11 o'clock. That will be on our 11 o'clock newscast on News 19. We'll have the latest information on that, any other further school closures, and most importantly, the information that you need to know about the weather conditions for tomorrow. For then, we'll see you later on tonight for News 19 at 11. I'm Chief Meteorologist Efren Afante.